Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our webinar. This is Sidra Iqbal here, and it's my pleasure to welcome you once again to this special series of webinars and conversations brought to you by the Entrepreneurship Youth Development Society in collaboration with the Express Tribune. We've been having some meaningful conversations with people who are in the thick of things, who are practitioners, who are impact practitioners, and who are really influencing the way we look at things. They're rallying to change behaviors, not just of individuals and communities, but also for policymakers, for big corporates, for young entrepreneurs, so that their orientation towards the world changes. And we put impact at the heart of it all. And it's also about mindfulness. It's also about being cognizant that anything that you're a part of, especially your business operations, what your livelihood is, how it impacts us and the planet. And what a fantastic theme to have for right at the beginning of 2023. May this year bring you lots of joy, abundance, and success. But let's sit together, let's put our hearts and our minds together to define what exactly is success and how do we create win-win formulas for the society and for organizations. Well, in our last webinar, we showcased organizations that do exactly that. And these are the social entrepreneurship efforts where people believe that it's more about giving back. It cannot be solely about profit. Or may I say that they have redefined what profits mean to individuals and to groups of people. Today, we are going to explore some more definitions, especially when we talk about CSR. Now, this is a terminology that has been in the center stage for the last many decades, many years. But now the conversation seems to have moved into the ambit of sustainability, innovative strategic interventions, and of course, impact. So, what is the relationship between the two? And how can alternative solutions for these challenges be created? Do we really have to go back to the drawing board, reinvent some of the wheels, and rethink the relationship between the mechanics, the cogs, and the impact that we are trying to create? Let's dive right into it. There's a lot to unpack. But first and foremost, let me introduce my wonderful panel to all of you. We have with us, of course, Faraz Khan, who's not just a dear friend, but a multi stakeholder investment and impact specialist, author, public speaker with over 25 years of experience. He is the founder of Social Entrepreneurship and Equity Development Ventures. We commonly and lovingly call it the SEED. Thank you so much, Faraz, for being here with us. And of course,
Thank you.
we also have with us currently the chairman of BOT, Indus Earth Trust, teaching at IOBM as faculty, and of course, Water for Women program and the working group set up by the government and the IUCN for the establishment of marine protected areas. Somebody who's extremely passionate about the subject of climate vulnerability and impact. We have with us a senior journalist, a very important voice, an advocate of passion, Afia Salam. Thank you, Afia ji, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
And last but definitely not the least, when we talk about vulnerable, underserved community, we have been focused and have been putting disability inclusion in the center stage. So somebody who's definitely very passionate about it and currently is heading partnerships at Purple Tuesday, works with people and organizations to create a socially responsible world, has been in the field for the last 15 years, have been working for non-profit organizations, is an expert in communication and project management, and of course, fundraising and strategy. We have with us Charlene Overend. Thank you so much, Charlene, for being here with us.
Thank you.
So, Faraz, let me kickstart this conversation by actually probing you about our beloved terminology, social corporate responsibility. We would all want to see corporates to be good corporate citizens and give back to community. But now, since the conversation has moved into the ambit of impact, and we're talking ESG and this new world where innovation and sustainability is the new mantra, what is the connect between CSR and impact?
First of all, thank you so much for having us. And Sidra, let me just dive straight into it. It's not optional anymore. It's compulsory. There was a time when CSR was, it was optical. It was for annual report glorification, and it was a good thing to do by the private sector. Not anymore. I mean, we're living in the times of climate-induced disasters. We need to the tune of $3 trillion by 2050 to achieve the SDG goals. and no one has that kind of money. So, in order to save the planet and the way we live and our future generations, all the stakeholders have to come together and create a more synergetic and structured approach in order to achieve the SDGs. Now, CSR is a concept that is literally ancient now. As I said, it was for, long time ago, private sector used to actually put a percentage, a very minute percentage of doing the good things for the communities. It has moved. It has tremendously moved, and it is going to move dramatically in times to come and within our lifespans. Um, CSR over the years moved towards social investments, and social investments as instruments move towards corporate impact venturing. Now, that's been the journey of the conventional CSR to corporate impact venturing, where the private sector across their supply distribution communities, they invest in interventions that are good for the communities, societies, the planet, and for their base profits as well. But more importantly, there are two other things, which one is the mindset, and the second are those practices and processes intrinsically in organizations and extrinsically that are changing and needs to change further. Now, when I throw in the figure of 3 trillion in the next by 2050 to achieve the SDGs, there are stakeholders in the world who have got pots of money: the government, development sector, private sector, philanthropy. Not even no single stakeholder have that kind of money to actually achieve, in times to come. So what they do is they actually put their money together in a blended form. But private sector is under immense amount of pressure because they are probably financially the biggest stakeholder in this world. And it's not that optical and peripheral and marginal effort that would actually save the planet. It has to be more intrinsic. So what is happening in that intrinsic transformation within private sector? As I told you about the instruments from CSR to corporate impact venturing, it is changing. But through the regulators' pressures, through the consumer pressures, through the investors' pressures, the private sector is transforming their products and services, their practices, and their processes, along with even the raw materials that they're using for whatever they're producing out there in the market. And all that has a very direct impact on the achievement of SDGs as well as the climate in this world. You can actually see that the world is moving from conventional energy sources to renewable. They're moving from diesel influenced cars and petrol to renewable energy. The food and beverage is changing. HTPs and the regulation on HTPs is coming into shape. And all that is simply because it is just the right thing to do, and it would actually impact on our planet and lives for the future, which is not just consumers, it's our
Yeah,
future generation. So
absolutely.
that's just a kind of a synopsis of
But
what you've
Firaz,
asked.
if I may stick just a little nugget there and probe you a little more, who do you think is in the driving seat? You're absolutely spot on when you say that we can no longer ignore it. And this thought process has now been, put into action without any policy intervention. There are corporates who are setting and giving themselves ambitious targets and saying, you know what, by 2040, we'll have a net zero effect on the planet. Do you think this is in response to the customers, the consumers, the stakeholders? Who is the most powerful group to drive this narrative and push more and more organizations, governments, stakeholders to take that leap of faith and to be in contribution?
Great question. And to be honest, I don't have an answer for that. And I'll tell you why I don't have an answer for that.
Mhm.
There are places in this world, there are geographies, there are countries that are where the regulation is the real stakeholder, and that drives innovation and impact and sustainability. Case in example, the Nordics, the New
Mm.
Zealand, in Scotland, and there the policy and the regulatory frameworks and bureaucracy and systems is so and they're coming from the consumers and citizens.
Yes.
So over there, I would say yes, that's the regulator side.
Mm.
And there are geographies that where the private sector is absolutely controlling the entire environment,
Mm.
like US, if
Yes.
you see. Okay, so over there, private sector needs to take a lead uh, into driving this change in sustainability.
And what does it mean for
Consumers,
countries like Pakistan?
I think, Pakistan is going through a transformative phase
Right.
where, because we have been unfortunately the recipient of one of the largest climate-induced disaster, so this urgency has kind of kicked in at the policy level as well as the private sector level as well as at the regulator level as well and at the consumer level as well.
Right. True.
Everyone is talking about it. My 18-year-old daughter is conscious of the fact that uh, her actions are going to lead to a detrimental or a positive impact on society, to the institutions that we work with, and even in the regulator space. There is a lot of activity. We are a long way ahead. I mean, behind at this point of time, but
Mm.
we are moving in the right direction. Slow,
You're
but we are.
absolutely right. And I think excellent example, especially when you mentioned the Nordic countries. What I noticed, I was recently in Europe and I realized when they have an ambition for 2020 for sustainable cities, for clean energy, for alternative uses, they're making sure that they actually incentivize the travelers, the citizens to take the mass transit. And they're building now. I mean, I was told that the RERA in Paris is as big and as huge as 17 highways stitched together. So that's massive. But Afyaji, while we talk about the role of the corporates and the governments and the policymakers, we cannot discount the tremendous role and contribution media and voices like yourself have played. I think looking back, I remember it was the initial years of me having graduated, stepped into the communications era. And without taking names, there was a big corporate organization running a tree plantation drive. And they were being accused of deforestation. And I remember Afyaji's article, and she, we were in an open town hall like conversation. And she asked this question that, are you planting the same tree type as you're deforesting? So, I mean, getting into the nitty gritties of it, that fine, you're planning to do the CSR drive, it looks good, it feels great, but are you offsetting the damage you're doing? Afiji, how far have we come from that place? And just like Faraz is saying, if we're all in the same boat, then where is the resistance coming from? If the government realizes, the business realizes it, the communities and the people, the consumer realize it, then why are we not going all out?
We need to go all out. So thank you for this conversation, and it's much needed. And just let me give me a minute to take you through the different phases the CSR conversation has developed. Because earlier CSR was corporate social responsibility, and the corporates were supposed to be responsible to their, or answerable. When you say responsible, it generally meant accountable to the shareholders. So
Ji.
any profits they made, it should have gone into their shareholders. They should have had the benefit of it. That was the driving thought. Then, of course, it meant no, we need to give our input to the society we function in and we profit from, etc., etc. But it was very, very unorganized, as Faraz has mentioned. That it was a feel good thing. It was a nice thing to do. If somebody came around and said, "Oh, we want to hold a seminar," they probably give you a banner. If somebody's printing a brochure, they'll give you an ad. So it wasn't focused.
Ji.
Now things have moved ahead. The intensity of the conversation plus the intensity of the events, like Faraz has mentioned, has brought focus on a lot of things that need to be done, that there was room for so much of improvement that could be done. But if you look at it, the term from CSR, we moved to CSV, creating shared values. Now, that was a newer concept. It was difficult for those to stomach who used to go and try to be the recipient of CSR, but it made business sense also, because as Faraz mentioned, the entire supply chain and the communities connected with that supply chain were being invested in and upgraded, and the capacity, the processes, they were all being improved. So it was a good thing for that industry itself. So, and that is when the concept of the triple bottom line started coming in. So people first were only focused on being in the black, and then of course they realized that you can't really be, say, having only a growth oriented profit if you're not investing in your environment, etc. Because all producers are ultimately consumers also, if not just of their own goods or other goods. So they would also want the optimum benefit. And then, of course, the resonance of the environmental sector, the activism over it, the legislation over it, and the whole environment seemed to be collapsing around us. And that realization that we are not living on another planet, just running our factories and services, we are part of it. So if we are part of that, then we have to play our part. And then now you have CSER and ESG. But if you look at this current disaster, the scale of it, and I'm now right now only talking of Pakistan, that's 2022. Everybody is playing a part, but this is as a reaction to the disaster. So I don't know if what the big corporates are putting in should be termed as CSR itself, or is it does it have a tinge of philanthropy on which Pakistanis are really, really great? They give a lot of money for when people need it, the country needs it. So CSR, CSER, ESG, it has to be more focused, and there comes the role of the regulator. And if we look at the regulations, it is not mandatory. It is a recommendation. If you look up the SECP side, it gives you guidelines. It does not give you the laws, the bylaws, the if you violate it or if you fall short of it, then what is going to be done? I mean, if we don't pay our complete taxes, the FBR is going to get on our case. SECP is not going to anybody's case if they do not practice this. So this is where it is difficult for companies to plan unless and until it is an integrated part of their operations. Like we do see some of our companies here now have moved into it. They have not only invested within their supply chain, they have also owned up to being a very responsible part of the society. And they've gone beyond their area of specific operations. So those who can, they have done it. Those who can't, not everybody can, because not all companies have such big operations. And if they even improve their processes and bring them in, to be less damaging. Until now, the processes themselves were damaging. Even if you were doling out a lot of money into the communities, if your processes are damaging the underground water, if the air quality is being spoiled, so that doesn't really cut it. So this is something that we need to look at it. That regulator needs to put on regulations.
Very true. But even when the regulator or the policy makers make suggestions, there are times that our mind cannot stitch it all together. I'll bring it closer back to home again. We're talking energy renewables. We know that right now we are still using a lot of fossil fuels, even to generate electricity. And that's a huge burden on our exchequer. We're going through a turmoil. There is a recent suggestion of curtailing the market operating hours to 8 p.m. And then, of course, for the marriage halls and the public and the social gatherings to end by 10, there is resistance. There is resistance from the business makers, from the banquet halls, and even from society and people. Afiji, then can we really call ourselves compassionate and caring towards the environment?
So this climate change, environment, the entire discourse is about behavior change. This is not a switch on, switch off thing that, you put in this, even if it is a regulation. So earlier I was saying there are no CSR regulations, but these, if the government puts down these regulations and there's resistance, it means that we have to change the behavior. Now, sometimes it is top down. It has to be done. It has to be done. We do not have enough fuel to, for these late night parties and opening up businesses late. And also, we haven't yet reached that stage, but globally there is this conversation. And if you go, and I suggest it to everybody, just look up the drawdown project. It's a global group of scientists who have come up with that drawdown project, which says that our lifestyle change can only make sense or be more sustainable if we let go of some of the newer things we've been running after and take a step back. So, sun up to sundown operations used to be the norm until what, two, three generations ago?
Absolutely.
And they were sustainable. And
Yeah.
right now, it is the need of the hour because we do not have the energy, resources to,
Not only that, I mean, look at everything. We used to have farmers markets. We used to have that jhola or that basket that we would carry.
yeah,
There were no plastic bags to carry your grocery bag. We didn't have bottled water, which comes in plastics. So, I mean, all of these were innovations, and we were actually very happy to receive them. But now they're adding up. But coming to another area of our conversation, Charlene, I would like to direct this one to you. Uh, Disability inclusion has forever been a favorite when it comes to CSR initiatives. A lot of companies, both national, global, companies with a huge global footprint, have taken pride for how they've given back to the most vulnerable, the most underserved, community, people with disabilities or people with special abilities. Uh, how do you see their performance? If some great work has been done, but do you think that it's enough? And do you think at times it was pink washing, blue washing, whatever favorite color of the rainbow you'd like to pick, when they made it purple and made themselves relevant? And also, please tell us a little bit about Purple Tuesday.
Thank you, Sidra. Yes, really good question. So yes, absolutely, organizations have been addressing disability in different ways for decades. But I would still say it is one of the least understood of the protected characteristics. And so therefore it's the last to the agenda, shall I say, to the themes of their strategies, CSR strategies moving forward. And it really is quite surprising whenever you take into consideration that 17% of the global population has a disability, and not only that, the disability market themselves is valued at $13 trillion annually, increasing. So there really is huge amounts of social and commercial opportunities that that disability can bring to a business, and we at Purple are trying to help organizations to move away from just seeing disability about vulnerability, about the responsibility of charity, about the responsibility of government to help, but also to see the value that disability can bring to their business. And I suppose the conventional approaches in CSR, where has been like one-time interventions, especially looking at the disability space, is not as effective as the longer-term investment to addressing the issue. And we also see that approaches that are more multifaceted and that address a number of different priorities have greater value and impact for that organization. So in terms of Purple Tuesday, just to set out what it is that we're trying to do. So Purple Tuesday is a social global movement. It is a change program that calls on organizations of all sizes, across all sectors, to take responsibility to improve the customer experience for people with disabilities and their families 365 days a year. And we've made it particularly easy and simple for organizations to get involved, to remove those engagement barriers. And organizations simply make one commitment every year that enhances their accessibility, their practice, so that customers with disabilities have a better experience, a more inclusive experience in their business. Mm-hmm. And this provides a framework. Purple Tuesday provides a framework that allows organizations to embed disability inclusion in a sustainable way.
And what are the key pillars to that? Because I see that you head partnerships, and just like we were saying, handing out wheelchairs, making lives easier. It almost reminds me of the analogy that, are we handing out, feeding a man with fish, or are we really teaching him to fish? Where has the conversation around these partnerships moved to? When you're designing a framework, how do we make disability inclusion more sustainable? What would you like these partners to do? Should they just be making the experience easier, giving out handouts, or are we saying build careers, make spaces, hold spaces? What's the ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've coined the phrase the purple pillars to disability inclusion,
Right.
and they're the three P's. One is place. So this is your digital, your built environments. How can you, as an organization, improve the accessibility of those environments for people with disabilities? Then you've got your people. How are you building the disability confidence, building the disability leadership of your organizations and for your people? And how are you engaging and attracting and retaining that disabled talent, those disabled customers into your organization? And then lastly, looking at the policies and processes, how your organization operates. How can we help you remove the barriers that are most often unintentional barriers for engagement for the disability communities in your business and how they operate?
Very
So
true.
our call to action is for businesses to look right across the organization, across the different functions, and how they can identify and remove the barriers for customers and people and employees with disabilities.
So allow me to say this, you're taking it away from being one dimensional into an arena where it becomes three dimensional and more wholesome. But at the same time, looking at the kind of pressures, for us, we're hearing so many reports, analysts, experts actually cautioning us of a possible global recession in 2023. If that happens, we are only beginning to have a conversation around how urgent the need to do sustainable and to make sustainable impact is, and to keep delivering it. But if the pressures of business pile up, if there is the risk of failure, the risk of unemployment, the risk of collapse right around the corner, do you still see that impact will stay relevant?
Um, a nice googly and a very good question. The fact is, if I look at it from the private sector's perspective, of course, profits are very important for them. But there is, at the board level, across the board, at the investors level, across the board, there is a very clear realization that if your market is not there, what are you going to do business with? And when I say this climate-induced disasters and the environmental damage is for real, and there is a huge recognition over there. Now, it's a very fine line when it comes when your bucket of investment shrinks because of recession.
Right.
I truly believe if you look at the biggest investors in the world right now, which is like BlackRocks of this world and Standards of these worlds, they have allocated and they have predicted recession in the coming years. They have allocated a specific percentage of their investments into sustainability. Now, when the investors see that this is the place to go despite recession, that basically means there are more opportunities as well. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, we have to move from fossil to renewable. We have to do away with from plastic to biodegradable. So there are new opportunities. There is new employment. There is new investments coming in that space as well. That is going to help the recession to recede off as well, because there is hope. Hope is the biggest driver, be it in the investment arena or a private sector arena or in spiritual arena. So I think I would see yes, it might slow down a bit during recession, but the momentum would continue because people see the return on investment in investing in sustainability as well. Along with just the last line, Afia rightly mentioned about ESG. If you see the European taxonomy, the regulators over there are very, very, very structured. And because of that, you see a more tangible application of sustainable activities in the private sector, because it's directly linked with not voluntary activities, but mandatory activities if you want to be listed in stock exchanges over there. And that kind of is changing the tide as well. In emerging markets, even in Pakistan, yes, the ESG is still voluntary, but there is in SECP and PSX, they've created task forces in order to see in the next 2 to 3 years how we can convert this voluntary environment to compulsory environment. And the moment that happens, a new set of investments, a new set of activities and practices and processes would start emerging that would create employment as well. If you see in the past 3 years, sustainability heads, ESG heads, skill sets, innovation, and technology have suddenly, that's the future of the market. So there is a
Those are the
lot of
new,
new
absolutely.
economy.
That's the new emerging, careers, arenas for you. And you've made a very solid case. I mean, I don't necessarily see this as, we all cave into our tendency to villainize the big bad corporates, right? But what you're talking about, having that as a compulsory policy framework or as a compulsory regulatory framework, is pointing to me towards a resolve, a societal resolve that this is important and this is the way forward. And we need to cascade that not just at a societal or at a community level, but to probably take it at a humanity level, a global humanity level. But
Sidra,
Afia, yes.
sorry,
Faraz, you'd like
I
to add
just want to.
something? Yeah.
I wanted to actually refer to a conversation that Afia and myself had in Islamabad, I think a few weeks back. And we said, okay, transition is important. It's critical. The pace of transition is extremely important. All these big corporates who are actually, are we becoming, apologists for them? No. But we absolutely need to realize that this transition is happening. It needs to happen at a much better way. And we need to help these. Like, for instance, if there is a country which is on fossil fuel, that country should cease to exist just because it's actually running on fossil fuel. No, it needs to move from fossil fuel to renewables. Plastic needs to be recycled. And that's exactly the kind of an approach we need to see, that we need to take like societal approach to the private sector and say, okay, you are a great contributor to goodness as well. And there are practices that you definitely need to change. And let's collectively
I have
move
another
towards.
word for all of you. And the word that my mind is on is integration. Like Afia ji just mentioned, we have one of the worst humanitarian crises in Pakistan in the form of the recent floods. And that took a third of the country underwater. Millions were homeless and they lost their jobs and their livelihoods. And I don't necessarily see on part of the government or on part of the corporates that there was any ill intention or it wasn't a crisis of intention or willingness. But what I saw as a missing gap, Afeji, and I'd love your comment on this, is the sequencing of the priority. A lot of companies, when they jump into action, they're there for rescue and relief. No pharmaceutical, no FMCG was told that, okay, hold back, we'll probably need you. But they end up exhausting most of their gunpowder in the rescue and the relief. And donor fatigue comes in, and that's where the missing piece of sustainable CSR and impact comes through. We are already struggling. There was an overwhelming response that came immediately, but 5 months down the line, now when you need reconstruction to happen, rehabilitation to happen, we haven't reintegrated. We haven't had the sequencing of the priorities right. What would you say to that?
Well, I would first of all totally agree on this, that this should have been thought of. But, well, to give the devil its due, the disaster was of a magnitude that they just could not sequence. Every effort and every available resource was thrown in to the rescue and relief, because don't forget, it was 1/3 of the country. The people in 3-4 districts are still underwater. I mean, their homes are still underwater. So yes, it should have been. But as far as the corporates are concerned, there's one more thing I would like to say, and I totally agree with what Faraz had said and what Charlene has said. Globally, there is this growing realization the signing on to the SDG goals also is voluntary. and there is no binding, or there is no naming and shaming or any fine. So like we missed all the Millennium Development Goals. I fear that we may not meet most of our SDGs, but that is a pathway. That is a
Hmm.
pathway towards which the companies who have realized, I don't think that even a global recession, you see, it will shrink. It will shrink the operations, but we must, you and I, who are in the communications field, also show people the opportunities that are there of green jobs. There's a whole new market. There's the whole new, world of tech, which has the potential of bringing in so many solutions to our current problems, and we cannot. So when we are talking about transitioning, we can't have that as a slow transition. This is the age of leapfrogging. There may be many of the things that we may not need to go through that path, because we can't. We've seen other countries do it, and we need to get to the solutions faster. So we
Yeah.
must also look at these things, and also it's good for the companies. Now, if they have already owned up to certain targets, they can't not, meet them. They can't go back to the old polluting ways, because that's not going to make sense to the consumers or to the other business community, nor to the regulators. So that integration needs to come from all directions, from the government, from the corporate sector, and the society needs to, actually be like somebody who's giving that call, but also somebody who's monitoring. And this has made a big difference. We have come to this stage where companies are owning targets without being demanded. So that shows that there has been a shift. And with
So,
that, I
Shalini, would you?
actually
Yeah.
need to apologize. My another call is about to start in 2 minutes.
Right. Thank you so much, Afia. What you have just embedded and injected in the conversation is a lot of hope. I think what you're pointing towards is that there is enough momentum, enough critical mass to sort of keep going, and you can't break that track. It cannot come to a shrieking halt. And I would love to buy into your idealism. Thank you very much for making time for us. We're going to continue for a couple of more minutes. And by the way, I want to remind all our viewers, you're watching us on various socials, and this is going to be around on our Facebook and also on our YouTube. If something's really landing with you, please do share it. And of course, keep this conversation going. You can always share this webinar with other people. If you have any comments and feedback, please send them as comments. We are live right now, but at the same time, we'd love to keep hearing from you. So if you're watching a replay, use the hashtag replay, and let 2023 be the year of resolve. And it shouldn't be limited to just the government and the organizations, but it should come from your heart and soul. So thank you, Afia ji. Charlene, I
Thank
want
you.
to take another question towards you. And this one's going to be about disabilities again. Um, there are many companies, I think, again, would not want to comment or doubt their intention, but they make one time interventions. And their favorite poster child, sometimes they milk a campaign. And what exactly Afia was pointing to, we never hear phase two or the next chapter of the story. You being someone who's not only heading partnerships, but also helping them weave a narrative, not just people with disabilities, but also the organizations who are partnering with you. How do you stitch that gap?
That's a really good question, and it goes back to my point earlier. We know that these one-time interventions, whilst they can work, they're very short-lived, and the longer-term investment is what is needed when addressing things such as disability and inclusion. And it goes back to my point in terms of like where you need to encourage businesses to see the multi-layers, the intersectionality that disability addresses within your business, really can help drive those positive changes, and it's a cultural change as well for the organization. And we approach it with businesses in that it can't just be a bottom up or top down approach. It has to be inside out, back to front. It really needs to be addressed right across the organization for it to really work. When you look at the statistics, 50% of us, if not more now since the last time the research has been done, is impacted. People know somebody who has a disability within their close networks. So it's not really a minority issue. It really is something that affects the majority of us at some time or another. And as we get older, we acquire disabilities. So for businesses, it really is not, they can't not address the issue. They need to future-proof their organizations moving forward, so that they can serve their aging customer base, their aging employee base. And so we are really working hard with businesses to be able to understand that and be sustainable in their approach. And the Purple Tuesday movement allows them to do that. It allows them to help benefit their people, help benefit the disability community, and ultimately improve their bottom line as well by attracting more customers with disabilities into their organizations and attracting and retaining more disabled talent. And so really it is a win-win situation.
And I think it points to active listening. If any organization is to future proof itself and be keyed in and continue, we had the Generation X and then the millennials and now the Gen Z, whatever alphabet is now going to follow on from there, you need to keep them engaged, you need to keep listening to them, and you need to keep responding to them. But for us, it would be, it would be a disservice if we close this conversation without bringing in to it the tools of accountability now available. We live in a far more connected world. While the organizations, the stakeholders, the government, and the policy makers are aspiring to have net zero impact on the environment, there is a huge digital footprint that they carry. So anytime that they make a commitment, it can no longer be a one-time intervention. They will be held accountable. And I think one of the things that the organizations and people and leaders in positions of impact are more scared of is the cancel culture. You see one little gap hole and we are ruthless in tarnishing their brand, the story so far, and we just cancel them out. Is that an opportunity or a threat?
I think it's an expression of the mindset that we're living in, unfortunately. Yeah. And I personally am not for it, for a very simple reason that you cannot cancel something which is going in a good direction, and just because of one fault line, you actually start blaming. And that's the kind of an environment we have gotten into. Taking a step back, I think the regulators and the consumers, both hand in hand, will transform the sustainability culture, if we may call it. And one last bit, it's a business case, Sidra. Sustainability is a business case, a very, very clear understanding that is seeping into the investor and private sector, that it is not about being optical and peripheral. If you are doing green, if you're going through a transition, or if you're committing to net zero, it is good for your business. As simple as anything. And right. That in itself is actually driving regulation and customer loyalty at the same time.
I think it takes me back to what Maya Angelou said, just the essence of it. Do better. And when you know better, do even better. Like sometimes we are we have this, overthinking and execution paralysis. We are so much in our heads that have we found the perfect solutions? Will I be judged on it? Should I put it in action? That we don't allow it to unfold and build on each other. I think just as we have tools of sustainability, of innovation, the ability to connect and have compassion, we must hold space for not knowing as well and still trying to achieve the best we can. So as we wrap this conversation up, if I could ask both of you for some favorite words when it comes to the discourse and the conversations around sustainability. And I'd love for our viewers to have these open-ended, overarching words to sort of mull over and find their own way. I'll throw in a few, and then maybe I'd love to come to you. What are your favorite words when it comes to CSR impact and its sustainable delivery? For me, it would have to be connection, compassion, having love, having the courage to do when, to sort of shift the drift. Faraz, what would it be for you?
Well, something that M.F. Hussain once said, and that holds immense amount of spiritual as well as practical value for me. He said, hold the skies in your hand as the stretch of your canvas is unknown to you.
Wow.
And that's exactly what this future world looks like. And it's an opportunity that we need to embrace for our future generation.
Very well put. Always an idealist, just like we know you and just like we love you, for us. Thank you for that. Charlene, what would be your favorite word, phrase, guiding post for the year 2023?
For me, well, thanks for us. It's very hard to follow that. But for me, is recognizing we are on a journey. Mm-hmm. We're constantly developing. We're constantly learning. We're constantly being guided by more insights. It's about understanding that there is a journey and no end point. It's constantly going to be evolving, and you have to just get started. That is my advice. If you haven't started, get started. And my other advice is don't stop. We know that there is going to be challenges ahead, but don't stop. Don't let us regress. Let's just keep progressing.
I think that's beautifully put, Charlene. And it reminds me, I do have friends who are not as optimistic and idealistic as all of us, as the present company I have. So I remember somebody commenting and saying, oh, I've lived more than half of my life. I have the last tail end. I'm going to die. Why do I have to worry about it? And our response to that should be, it's not that you need to be thinking about CSR impact and doing something about it, delivering it in a sustainable, innovative, strategic fashion because, hey, you're going to die and become fertilizer. I think the more important thing to remember is that the ones you love get to live and get to inherit this world. So what is the quality of life you're leaving them with? So that's why maybe in the short term or medium term, even if it doesn't make business sense, although Faraz has made a very powerful case that it makes perfect business sense to be investing in it, but even if it doesn't, do the right thing and be guided by your hearts. So thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you, Faraz, for being here with us. And thank you for all of you for joining us live. And if you're watching a replay, thank you for watching the replay. Use the hashtag replay. Send me what landed with you. Please interact with us. And thank you once again, because we've had tremendous success with this series of webinars and conversation. Who says that conversations of substance are not popular? We've actually crossed a mark of million+ viewership on our last conversations. And I'm sure this one, being a powerhouse with Afia, with Charlene, and with Faraz Khan, would be no less. So whatever lands with you, please let us know in our comments and share it with friends and families and the relevant corridors where these conversations are needed. Take good care of yourself. I'll see you with another topic someday soon.